plug my phone in real quick.
Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment, where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels and the new book, The Spawn of Loki, a Norse fantasy in the world of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Ramon Terrell is our guest today. He is an actor and author who instantly fell in love with fantasy the day he opened R.A. Salvatore's The Crystal Shard. Years and many, many books later, he decided to put pen to paper for his own first novel. After a bout with aching carpals, he decided to try keyboards instead. This is what he says. Did you really? I'm curious about this. Is this hype, or did you really try starting at first writing by pen and paper?
Oh no, that's very much by pen. The very first time I decided to try to write a story, I was my parents and I we had moved to Texas from California, and we'd been there probably about I don't know, 6 months or no, about a year. And I'm laying on the floor, they're watching TV, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to try and write a story. So, I bust out the pen and paper, I'm laying on the floor, and I start writing, and I'm writing, and by about page 3 of this extremely unpublishable novel that I'm working on, my hands are just cramping up. And then, after a few days of extremely cramped hands and sore wrists and everything, I was like, this isn't working. And so I actually didn't write for quite a while because I got busy. And then when I came back to it, I remembered the sore carpal tunnels.
Right, and the
the
poor ergonomics of trying to write a novel by lying on the living room floor. So
okay. that would contribute.
So as an actor, Ramon Terrell has appeared in the hit TV series Supernatural, iZombie, Arrow, and Minority Report, as well as the hit comedy series Single and Dating in Vancouver. He also appears as one of Robin Hood's merry men in Once Upon a Time. My daughters would love to talk to you about that stuff, I'm telling you. As well as an arc guard on the hit TV show The 100. When not writing or acting, he enjoys reading, video games, hiking, and long walks with his wife around Stanley Park, which features prominently in the new book. His new book is Hunter's Moon, second in a series that started with Running from the Night. Welcome, Ramon. It's good to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. So, like I say, the new book is called Hunter's Moon, and it's the second in it. I read both the books. I read Running from the Night, which kicks it off, and I read Hunter's Moon, which just came out this summer. And very, very briefly, these are, if you don't mind my trying to sum it up in an elevator pitch, these are the story of a young man who is a very, very fit. I would call him a mocap artist. He's a mocap dancer. That's his awesome job, and he has women hitting on him all the time, like literally all the time, and he gets embroiled in basically a romantic triangle and is being hunted by vampires. I'm just curious, I'm going to ask you about your vampire cosmology and all of this and about Vancouver, but where was this series born? And is this your first book series, or where does this come in your work?
Well, it's actually the second series that I ever wrote. And the first series being a fantasy series, Legends of Dr. Shaniel, if you can remember how to pronounce that. The Hunter's Moon is it's the second series, 4 books. And as far as how it was born, honestly, I always describe it as the story I tried not to write. Because the idea popped up into my head right when I was about midway through the second book in my first fantasy series. It's like vampires. And I immediately rejected the idea in my mind. I'm like, this is when vampires were at their height. Everything was vampires. You had vampire, Pixar-type cartoons. You had vampire movies, TV series. Like, everything in the world was vampires. So I'm like, I'm not going to be this Me Too author. I'm not jumping on the bandwagon. I'm going to, I like vampires too. I'm a big fan of Underworld. But I'm like, I'm not doing that. Everybody's doing it. I'm not jumping on the bandwagon. And by the time I was beginning the third book in my fantasy series, the idea was so strong. It was so strong, I literally had to stop what I was doing and at least jot down notes. Just a few notes of what it was, just the basic premise, so that I could come back to it, because it wouldn't leave me alone. It was the most insistent story. It was the most insistent idea I've ever had to date.
Well, I mean, maybe the idea is that even if there are so vampires are popular, right? So you got to get over that. You know, you go to somebody and you go, hey, I've got a thing that has vampires, and the first thing that to do is to go, oh, I'm so tired of vampires, or whatever. I say this as a guy who writes novels with vampires in them, okay? And then you go, yeah, but let me tell you the story. And if the story's good, people get over it pretty quickly. You know, it's always about that. You know, in your case, the thing that I think is really interesting here is, first of all, I think the main character is very striking, and you've got this sort of unique vampire cosmology. So, first of all, about the vampires, I call it the cosmology. I mean, the different orders of all the vampires. Did you draft it out like which vampires are more powerful, which are less, which have the powers to walk in the daylight, and which don't?
I did. Basically, I sat down and I thought about vampire. I thought about all of the different things for vampire lore, all of the different aspects of the different stories that I'd ever seen, and the one thing that always stuck out was things like the half-breeds. And so I kind of took the story and I put a few little details in it. So basically you have your turned vampires, people who have been bitten by a vampire and they turned. And then you have your people who were born vampires. And then you have, the older the vampire, then the more powerful they are. And then, in some of the stories that feature counts, the count is obviously thousands of years old, and they're the most powerful. So I kind of took all of those things, and I just thought about them for a while, and I said, okay, first of all, vampires, the general thing is they're undead. They're not living, but they're not necessarily dead, so they're undead. So the first thing I thought about is it was a question that somebody actually had just posed in conversation in passing years ago that I remembered. They're like, okay, if vampires are undead, how can you be half undead?
Right.
So it was an interesting question. It was an interesting question, and I don't like to get scientific about things because, I'm not a scientist, so physiology is not my thing. But I thought about that, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of different takes on vampires. So what if my vampires actually were thought to be undead because the early humans that discovered the first grave of vampires for the first time, vampires actually, their hearts don't beat very frequently. So when you had early humans who discovered that first crypt and that first vampire, they felt for, a pulse or a heartbeat or whatever. And when nothing happened, they're like, this person is dead. They found somebody who looked like they hadn't been decayed, obviously. So they're like, why are they buried? And so, there was obviously no pulse or whatever. But then when the vampire actually woke up, they're like, well, how does this happen? And then over time of them encountering these people with no pulse, they thought of them as, undead, when in fact their hearts beat not as frequently.
Legends and stories. Well, and you've introduced a really interesting concept. I mean, any of these might be familiar or might be completely new. You keep things, you also throw things away. I mean, one of the funniest bits is that you've got the characters who are they're trying to figure out what's true and what's not true about vampire legend, and they think, well, I know for sure that garlic is not going to have any effect because that's stupid. And then it turns out that I hate to use a spoiler, but it turns out that garlic is actually a powerful weapon against vampires. I mean, that was really cool. They're a biological entity. I mean, like Whitney Strieber's The Hunger features vampires that are essentially, they're another race. You can become a vampire. You can be Ramon Terrell in Vancouver, and if the wrong set of circumstances befall you, you can become a vampire. You've also got this interesting thing where older vampires are more powerful, younger vampires are less powerful, half vampires are less powerful, but a half vampire who is turned by a super older vampire will kind of be leapfrogged in power, and so they'll have extra power. It's the politics and, for want of a better word, cosmology of your vampires, I thought was really cool, and also it didn't really get bogged down. I mean, I like the fact that the characters, are learning about this stuff, but the real key of the story is this kind of very sort of romantic and sexy and sometimes violent, just pure adventure going on. Okay. So this main character, Jelani, I found him to be really interesting, and the reason, and I want to know if this is like where you're coming from. The way that Jelani's story is told reminds me actually of the kind of romantic story that usually stars a female character, where there's like our favorite character, and she's in the big city, and she's got like 3 or 4 interesting guys after her, one who's kind of a man whore, and one who's kind of a pure heart, and one who's kind of a prince from another country. And that's what's going on here, is that she's, Jelani basically cannot avoid all these women in his life. And, it's really like a romance book. Did you set out to do that, or is that just where you wound up?
Well, to a degree. The one thing I wanted to look at the situation of I wanted to look at a romance angle slightly different, not necessarily setting out for romance, although I'd love to have the legions of romance readers read it. But the main thing that whenever you look at a story, like it's okay to have a female protagonist with multiple guys who are interested in her, but given how male-centric entertainment is. I mean, you can look at 10 movies and possibly not see a female lead, let alone a strong female lead. But what I wanted to do was turn that on its head and have a male character who has more than one woman who's interested in him, but at the same time not have him be like the James Bond player, or the guy who's like shrugs it off. Like, he takes each and every one of them seriously, and he, almost obsesses over not wanting to hurt, these people's feelings.
Yeah.
Which, it introduces a little bit of a slightly, humorous and ridiculous element, because he is being pursued by vampires. So, there's instances where he's like,
you're right.
Say again?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, there's actually one instance where he's like, all right, I don't have time to worry about this right now. I got to deal with this vampire situation. Yeah. But it's a part of his nature to, to look out for other people and to not want to hurt anybody. So you have that little element in there that I found was a lot of fun, and it was fun to play with that romance angle with the character who's very, sympathetic or possibly empathetic.
He is sympathetic. He does care a lot about these women. He's willing to sleep with all of them, but he cares deeply about each one of them. And I found he's a very interesting character in as much as he's incredibly healthy. You describe a lot of time where he is running or jogging or doing yoga or doing Tai Chi or exercising in some form or another, avoiding bad food, avoiding alcohol. He doesn't drink. You want to talk about the anti-James Bond. He doesn't drink alcohol particularly. I think, he doesn't, he's okay with it. It's just not his thing. It's a very, is this you, by the way? Did you just write yourself into a novel and have women throwing themselves at you all the time? Or is
well,
what is this?
That's actually you're pretty perceptive, and before everybody starts to your listeners start to snarl, just hear me out. I was probably about halfway to 3/4 of the way finished writing that book, and I was going back and I was kind of going over the manuscript and looking at some details to continue on to finish the book. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, I stopped for a second. I'm like, seriously? Did I just write myself? Because I never do that. Like, I had written 3 books before this one, and never once did it ever occur to me to write myself into a book, because, to me, it was kind of like, okay, that's a little bit of ego going on. Like, why am I going to write myself into a book? But what I did, and here's how that happened. I'm going to tell you how that happened. When you're writing fantasy, you're writing in the fantastical. So you have gigantic demons, or you might have monsters, dire wolves, what have you. And you have these characters who are dealing with big, larger-than-life situations while they're still dealing with, so to speak, the human condition. They're dealing with real life issues that plague us today, but in a much larger than life situation. So you have different races, like elves, dwarves, hobbits, what have you. But with writing this urban fantasy, the Hunter's Moon series, it was my first trek into real life. And so what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to put this guy, in this situation. I'm going to pick that him being from L.A. because, I have that experience of being from L.A. and moving to Vancouver. So, that's something that I can grasp onto to make it a little more real. And then without thinking about it, I started thinking, how would I react in this situation? How would I react in that situation? Okay, to make it more real. Because, again, I had never at that point written anything based in the real world. So I had to take real world experiences. So I drew from my own experiences. And before I realized it, I had written myself, and then I had also written, well, not all myself, because part of Jelani is who I wish I could be. But I had also written a large part of myself with all these female, love interests. And then I got really self-conscious before I published this book. I'm like, are people going to really think that I'm like this egotistical jerk who like writes women throwing themselves at him and everything? So I was really concerned about that for a while. And then that was when I made sure I gave him, some of my personal quirks in that, obsessing about not wanting to hurt anybody. And I really wanted to make it clear that he wasn't this character that has women throwing themselves at him, because I find that nauseating, I should say. So I made sure also that the female characters were in control as well.
Right, and that they're aware. And also, I mean, you're right that the females throwing themselves at the character might be nauseating if the character were a complete jerk that you couldn't identify with. In this case, he's such a nice guy. That's actually part of the, he's this great package that everybody's just sort of getting into. And I think that's, to some extent, that's what novels can do for us, is they can give us somebody to live, vicariously through. I think this would be a really neat, like, cable series in a way. It's very sexy, so it'd have to be like Cable, right? But
funny you say that.
But it has a sort of like Silk Stockings with if you pick a Canadian show, Silk Stockings with vampires feel to it that could be really cool. It's also diverse as hell, because you've got this just very diverse cast. Jelani is black. One of the girls is white. One of the girls is black. One of the girls is Indian. His roommate is Asian. It's a very colorful cast, and I think that's also kind of unusual. It's something for people to get their hands on and go, I like this because it has a very diverse cast.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was deliberate on your part.
Well, it was only partially deliberate. And the reason I say only partially deliberate is because, being an actor myself, I mean, I see, even before I was an actor, I see how things are cast, and I see how TV's cast, and the genres that I like to read in have come a long way. But, back when I first started reading fantasy, I saw how those were cast. And it just, it's just like, okay, can we get a little bit of, have a little bit of fun here? Can we mix it up? And then you look at real life, and real life, unless you're in a country that's more homogenous, you're going to see mixtures of people. And Vancouver is a very, it's an international city. So, I mean, you can look up and see anyone from just about any corner of the world. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who's not from somewhere, other than here. So, with that, I also looked at, I mean, you don't have to look far. I didn't have to look far. I mean, I just looked around, and there's people from everywhere. So when I cast these characters, it really just kind of fell into place that way. And the funny thing is, when you mentioned that it's, it has that ring of being a show, I'm actually working with a few people to try to make that happen. So not much news on that, but coming soon.
Yeah, knock wood. I'm totally there with that. That makes total sense. And I think that this kind of ultra-diverse cast is sort of where TV is going. Grey's Anatomy showed us how to do it, which is basically cast the parts. Whoever's good in the part is the part, and that's
exactly
where it winds up. Vancouver, you mentioned Vancouver. I got to say, Vancouver feels very alive. It feels very real. You mentioned that Stanley Park, which is where the first scenes of the first book take place. You and your wife go there. I just found it's very vivid to just spend time in and around this beautiful city.
Thank you.
It's the cool thing, I suppose, about that is that is a good example of write what you know. It's like, I know this park, I know this downtown, I know this coffee shop, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works very well. One last question. I wanted to ask you about your process. Like, you're a working actor, but I mean, when you're actually trying to finish a book, now that you're no longer laying on a carpet and trying to write it by hand, how do you churn out chapters? I mean, like, do you go out to the coffee shop? Do you shut the door in some room in your place, or what do you do?
Well, it's really kind of an evolving, changing process. When I first started writing, I would go, I was still living at home when I wrote my first book, and then there was a huge gap before I moved out on my own when I wrote my second book. But at first, I would write at home. I'd go upstairs to the computer and I'd just bang out, a bunch of a ton of words, and I'd be done. Then I got to a point where I would get up in the morning and I couldn't write a single word. I'd get distracted. Suddenly, the house needed vacuuming. Suddenly, I needed to do the laundry. It's just the weirdest thing. I love writing, but I would find any excuse not to write. It's the strangest thing. So my process now is I can get up in the morning and I'll go to a coffee shop, and the kind of drum of noise that a coffee shop produces, it's kind of it forces your mind to focus, or it forces my mind to focus.
Yeah.
So I use that, and I go and I'll spend from morning. Usually I'll try to do like a working day. So like, I'll spend 8 hours, at the coffee shop, off and on. Obviously, I'd leave and go get lunch and something. Walk around.
You order coffee while you're at the coffee shop, or
Oh yeah.
They don't try to kick you out, spending a whole day there.
Oh well, no, because I go in the morning. They know me by now, and I'll get like a tea or coffee or whatever, and then I'll have more than one drink. I'm not gonna order like a $2 drink and then spend 8 hours there. I order a few tea. I'll order several teas and whatnot, and like I said, I get up and I leave for lunch, and then I'll come back again and spend another 3-4 hours or what have you, and order several more drinks. So I'm pulling my weight, instead of just smooching there, and when I get home, I can work at home at night. It's the strangest thing. I can't work at home during the day, but I can work at home at night.
Yeah, I completely identify with that. How much, how much do you try to get done in a given day? Let's say you're working, you hit a certain point, and you go, well, that's good enough. What point is that?
Honestly, it kind of varies. I usually try to set a goal for a base goal of 5,000 words for the day. I usually try to shoot for 7. 7 tends to be my high average. About 6,000 is my general average. I had one 10,000 word day, which is it's a pretty good chunk of a book, but I haven't done that. I've only done that twice.
My jaw is on the floor. I mean, I'm seriously. I cannot believe that. There have been projects I've done where I was doing 4,000 words a session, but that hasn't been for years. I'm amazed at that, because when you think about that, that means you could be done with an 80,000 word book in basically a couple weeks. That's astonishing. That's really amazing. Good for you, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Do you think it makes it easier to do that kind of work, given that you know the universe that you're in, or do you, in other words, what bogs you down? What is it that where you're you hit a wall and you're like, boy, this is a tough day? What generally makes you get caught?
Speaking from my personal experience, I would say the only thing that bogs me down is if I don't have enough detail in the situation that I'm in. So there's a few different methods to writing. You have the outliners, the person who will, before they write page 1, they'll outline the entire story, and then they'll have, that whole structure, all the details of the world, the characters, so forth, and then they begin to write, and they go strictly by that outline. Then you have we call it pantsing. You have the Seat of the Pantsers, who they it's Discovery, the Discovery writer, and they do everything by discovery. There's no outline; they just discover the story as they go. And then
they don't know where they're going. They're just like, I don't know what's going to happen when he gets to the bottom of this cliff, but
exactly.
We're writing it. Yeah. Okay.
And then you have the hybrid method, which is what I use.
I see. And does that mean that you're making an outline and then allowing yourself to deviate from it, or what does it mean?
Yeah, I make an outline and I allow myself to discover what happens. So, I'll have all the major events, I'll have the world detailed, I'll have, the characters and so forth. But if a new character introduces themselves and it fits really well, I allow that to happen. I let it happen because they're there for a reason. If the story, kind of moves in a slightly different direction than I had intended, if it makes sense, I'll do it. If anything starts to meander, I have my outline there to bring everything back under control. So,
sure.
The outline more, basically allows you to make sure you have control over the story. But definitely, discovery is where the fun is. The unexpected things that happen, that's where the fun is.
Wow. So what are you working on? First of all, these books are very closely connected. These are not independent. Like there's not a new story starting with the second book. It's they are deeply connected. I take it they're a trilogy, right? Or will it be more than 3?
It's 4 books.
It's 4 books. Okay.
Yeah.
And are you working on the 4th one now, or are you already done with it?
Well, the series is actually complete, and Workfire Press has acquired it, and they're re-releasing it. So the 3rd book, Darkness of Day, I will be submitting that to them, to the editors, later this year. And then the final book, which is titled Reveneer, that one I'm hoping we can get like an early to mid next year release, or probably a mid next year release. We'll see what happens.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Wow. Well, I wish you the best of luck. I'm really enjoying this series, and it's just kind of it's a town and a world that I just want to sort of revel in. So it's a delight, and I hope that it brings you great success.
Thank you.
So Ramon Terrell's new book is Hunter's Moon, but you can go back also and pick up Running from the Night, which is ostensibly the Hunter's Moon series number 1, and Hunter's Moon is the 2nd book. So you should go get those and read all about the young man who can't escape the women or the vampires in his life. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic rest of your evening, and I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Bye.
You.